Dr. Karsanbhai Patel, Shri K.K. Patel, Dr. Anup Singh, Shri Chaya, members of the academic staff, graduating students and their parents, ladies and gentlemen. I am most grateful to the President, Dr. Karam Singh Patel, for inviting me to be the chief guest at this year's convocation. Nirma is one of our successful private universities, held in high esteem in India and abroad, and ranked amongst top 10 private universities by different non-government agencies. I am honored to be associated with it in this formal way and hope that I will prove worthy of the confidence you have chosen to place in me. Convocation is one of the most important events in the life of the university because it is the day that the students obtain their degrees, receive appropriate recognition of their talents and hard work, end their formal ties with the university, and embark on a self-chosen career. Since students are at the heart of the convocation, I would like to use the occasion to reflect on the quality of our higher education in India. And since most of you belong to science, pharmacy, engineering, and other science-related faculties, I would like to concentrate on the quality of scientific teaching in our universities. The university is an institution of higher education. Higher education is not the same as further education. It is different from and at the superior level of education. In the school, one is taught certain bodies of knowledge about different areas and accepts them as authoritative. In the institution of higher education, one takes a radically different approach to them. One learns how these bodies of knowledge are arrived at, by what methods, whether these methods are appropriate, and so on. In other words, one looks at their modes of legitimation or their grounds and participates in the creation of knowledge. And as the student acquires this capacity to participate in the growth of knowledge, he learns to apply this to his other beliefs and convictions and asks to know their basis or their grounds. In other words, higher education is not about learning or rote learning or accumulation of knowledge. Rather, it is about the cultivation of the capacity to think analytically and critically. An educated mind is reflective, self-critical, constantly asking questions why things are what they are and not otherwise. As a classical Sanskrit maxim puts it, sa vidya ya vimuktaye. That alone is true education which liberates the individual from inherited and uncritically accepted beliefs and prejudices. In other words, education is an education for freedom. It's in this context that I want to look at contemporary educational landscape in India and ask if it achieves this goal. Currently, India has about 306 state universities, 154 private universities, 129 deemed universities, 44 central universities, and 67 other university-level institutions. Central universities account for just under 3% of total student population. State universities around 40%, and private universities most of the rest. Between them, these institutions have around 1.7 crore students enrolled in our institutions of higher education. Of these, 38% are in what we call arts faculty, 18% in science faculty, 17% in commerce and management faculty, 16% in engineering, and just under 4% in medicine. The question is, what goes on in these institutions and in these faculties? Most of these universities find it difficult to recruit their teaching staff, so much so that nearly a third of their faculty positions remains unfilled. Those who are recruited by the university are not always properly trained or trained only to stay one step ahead of their students. Their interest in research is extremely limited, and they contribute little to the generation of new knowledge. There is also a further difficulty. In most universities, regional languages are the media of instruction. Since only a limited amount of creative writing is available in these languages, and there is no concerted program of translation from English into Indian languages, students have very limited access to great and original ideas and remain virtual prisoners of their teachers or the guidebooks written by them. It should not therefore come as a surprise that no Indian university figures among the top 200 in the world. In the widely respected Shanghai ranking of top 200 universities of Asian countries in world ranking, China has 6 universities among the top 200 in the world. Israel has 4, tiny Singapore 2, India none. China in many respects is similar to India, and the comparison between the two countries can be very instructive. In terms of contribution to the world's scientific research, China far outpaces India, a phenomenon that is deeply puzzling in view of the fact that, unlike India, China is not a democracy or a free society, and also because it had very limited knowledge of English until very recently. In chemistry, China contributes 20% of the world's scientific research, India about 4 to 6%. In physics, the figures are 13% and 4% respectively. And in the material sciences, China contributes 24% of the world scientific literature, and India about 6%. Although India is beginning to improve its record, especially in the area of innovation, it still has a long way to go. And Narayan Murthy, the widely admired architect of India's IT industry, remarked a few years ago that even in IT, where India enjoys high global visibility, it has no single groundbreaking product like the SAP of Germany, Oracle of the US, or the BAN of Holland that is world-class in its originality. It might be argued that a situation like this should not worry us. If we are not good at research, well, we are not good at it. Why not accept it? Well, I'm afraid that will not do. In a knowledge-based economy, research means power. Research means wealth. And a country that does not do research lacks both power and wealth. Secondly, research trains the mind, creates further researchers, and gives rise to a class of persons who are capable of thinking independently, challenging the established orthodoxy, and creating new ways of thinking. Third, and most importantly, persons who are not engaged in research lack intellectual curiosity and depth and make poor teachers. Only a good researcher can hope to mold the students in his image and produce self-questioning and restless students. Excellence breeds excellence, just as mediocrity tends to reproduce itself. This raises two questions. First, why do Indian universities lack a well-developed and self-sustaining culture of research or creativity? And second, what can be done to develop it? I shall very briefly take these questions in turn. The lack of a well-developed culture of creativity is not due to lack of talent. Indians are just as talented as any other group in the world, as they prove when they go abroad and start doing work. I think 3 factors are responsible for a weak culture of research, namely lack of training, inhospitable intellectual environment, and poverty of resources. In most universities in India, the kind of training required to develop critical and independent thought is neither valued nor cultivated. At the primary and secondary education, the emphasis is on authority, rote learning, reproducing what is passed on by teachers. These habits of thought are carried over onto colleges and universities. Undergraduate education offers little training of the mind and largely involves memorizing and reproducing the body of information provided by lecturers and professors. There is little provision for any kind of independent work either. Problems of undergraduate education are well known and do not need elaboration. They include outdated and rigid curricula, rote learning, high teacher-student ratio because of the shortage of teaching staff, separation of teaching and research and the consequent lack of research experience at an early stage, paucity of world-class, high-class reading material, and an ineffective quality assurance system. Students who go on to do doctoral research have no experience of doing research and are doing it often for the first time in their lives. They expect their supervisors to tell them what area to research and how to go about doing it. Few of them are trained to have the courage and the confidence to strike out on their own. Their thesis supervisors have to meet the quota of producing a certain number of successful doctoral students, and this discourages journey into uncharted areas. As Dr. Bhattacharya, the ex-director of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research puts it, the biggest bottleneck in India is not, and it's important, is not lack of money, it is, and I quote, lack of trained people and lack of ideas. The second factor militating against creativity has to do with the institutional factors. Universities in India are hierarchically structured, and younger colleagues enjoy little freedom. Some are overworked and spend much of their time spoon-feeding their students. State and even central universities enjoy little autonomy, either intellectual or academic. They are dependent for all their income on the government and have little incentive to do research, to link up with industries, and to invent new devices. Academic promotion is not generally based on research publication, but often on the administrative load one carries, the hours one teaches, never falling foul of the authority. There is therefore little incentive to do research. When I was Vice Chancellor of the University of Baroda, we introduced a rotation of headship, requiring that professors who had been heads for 10 years or more, or had reached a certain age, should yield place to their younger colleagues. Angry heads of department came rushing to see me. They complained, and I quote, that we had castrated them, that ignorant and immature people will now run and ruin the university, and that the era, as one of them put it, era of darkness was about to descend on the university. Once the rhetoric was chipped away, it became obvious that their concerns were mundane. They were opposed to the rotation of headship because of their lost control over large offices, personal secretaries, access to those in power, loss of prestige, freedom to come and go when they liked, and immunity to all kinds of discipline. The third factor, militating against creativity, has to do with limited resources. It is fashionable to build new buildings and launch eye-catching projects, but not fashionable to meet the basic academic needs of students and teachers. Currently, for example, India spends less than 1% of its GDP on higher education. It also spends less per student in higher education, 1/6 of what China spends, and 1/10 of what Brazil spends. Few universities have the resources to build up decent libraries. Few of them can afford to allow their promising young scholars to go abroad for further training, or even to attend conferences and workshops in their areas. Many universities have no funds even to invite eminent foreign scholars. In this kind of environment, there is hardly any scope for international cooperation or collaboration. In the light of what I have said, India needs to develop a well-conceived program of action, addressing the three factors that I have mentioned above as responsible for India's lack of creativity in scientific research. It needs to allocate more resources to higher education, especially at the state level. Rather than spread the resources thinly, it needs to identify areas of strength of different universities and concentrate on them. It also needs to create the right kind of environment and the right kind of structure. Colleges and universities should be free from rigid bureaucratic and government control and given the carrot of greater autonomy conditional on their performance. Above all, it must devise schemes to train inquisitive and analytical minds on a sufficient scale. A mind is not trained by reading books or by exhortation. It is only trained by coming into contact with other great minds and interacting with them. It is hardly surprising that 72% of the Nobel laureates were themselves trained by or students of Nobel laureates. Now, as a result of all kinds of factors, several factors, modern education has developed in the West more than in the rest of the world. The Western universities are centers of learning. Students flock there in large numbers and at a considerable financial cost. It is striking that collaborating with Western universities has been the general feature of all those universities in Asia which have a high record of publication. If you look at China, South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong, those universities which are ranked among the top 200 have a significant number of Western scholars and scientists. India could not be more different. Hardly any university has an international faculty score of more than 2, as opposed to some Singapore universities or Hong Kong, which have an international faculty score of 92 or even 96. While great universities of the United States and UK advertise their faculty positions abroad and recruit the best available candidates, India rarely does so. Even China and Singapore see nothing wrong in appointing foreigners to senior positions in their universities. India has often taken a very different view, largely on narrow nationalist grounds. It's only now that the government of India has realized how mistaken that policy has been. Now, there is no reason why India cannot draw on the West at the level of faculty, as it does at the level of what it teaches. This does not mean that the best minds are only to be found in the West. All it means is that the West had a head start, an early start, has produced talented people, and we should take full advantage of them in order to catch up with it and go beyond it. I remember the 11th and 12th plan clearly set out various ideas, and I canvassed those ideas when I was a member of Dr. Manmohan Singh's Global Advisory Committee for Overseas Indians. We can train students by sending them abroad for 3 years. We can have our doctoral candidates spend 6 months or thereabout in foreign universities. We can have summer schools where foreign scholars can come and teach. At a different level, distinguished foreign universities should be free to open their Indian campuses and provide the kind of education that do at home. And another way might be to attract retired Western scientists and scholars in sufficient numbers. They have their earned pensions, they do not need full salaries, and like many Western doctors who volunteer to work in medical camps and teach in hospitals in developing countries, I know a large number of Western academics who would be happy to come to India and teach. There is also no reason why our labor-intensive teaching cannot be organized differently. Some of the best universities in India can provide their teaching material to other universities. Indeed, some of the great universities in the world provide teaching courses which can be adapted by India as online courses and can be taught in different universities at the same time. In short, in education, as in other areas of life, quality control is absolutely crucial. And that is generally ensured by making sure that there are prizes to win, there are positions to achieve by talented and intelligent minds. I now want to end by simply saying the following. Barring a few pockets of excellence, our system of higher education is in a sorry state and needs urgent attention. We cannot keep sending our offspring abroad at huge cost and then rely on dubious practices to make the money that is so required. This damages us, the country, its economy, and its moral climate. We need careful thinking and planning. The wastage of enormous amount, the leakage of enormous amount of money every year to foreign universities is absolutely staggering. This hemorrhage has to stop. Careful thinking and planning are necessary. but they are both in short supply. The fact that there is no organized constituency for higher education and therefore no systematic political pressure makes the situation even worse. The rich and middle class people opt out of the system by sending their kids abroad. And as for the poor, they have no interest in doing any such thing because they can't even dream of sending their children to higher education. So everybody acknowledges the problem, but hardly anyone has an interest in solving it. And the longer that this inertia lasts, the greater would be the damage to our economy and university, and the more difficult it will be to our chances of improvement. As in many areas of life, we might be left behind. When the world has moved on, we might be left behind crying. In such a situation, private universities can provide part of the answer. They can be imaginative, innovative, experimental, open to collaboration with Indian and foreign universities, willing to allocate resources to disciplines and areas that are most likely to give results, and train their faculty to international standards. In doing so, such as Nirma is doing, it can show by example what the state and other Indian universities at their best are capable of achieving, and create a climate in which enough pressure is exerted on all universities to deliver high-quality education. With all its limitations, the United States provides a good example of how private, state, central, and other kinds of university can work together to produce both excellence and expansion and ensure the minimum intellectual development a university should aim to provide. You, who are receiving your diplomas and degrees today, are products of a private university and begin your life with several advantages. I wish you all well in your future endeavors and like to hope that you will use your talents and skills to create a just, humane, and vibrant India of which we can all be proud. Thank you and good night.